Zohran Memdani held a press conference to respond to former President Trump's threats that included rounding him up, deporting him, jailing him, and more. Here is some of what Memdani had to say. Yesterday, Donald Trump said that I should be arrested. He said that I should be deported. He said that I should be denaturalized. And he said those things about me. Someone who stands to be the first immigrant mayor of this city in generations. Someone who would also be the first Muslim and the first South Asian mayor in this city's history. He said these things less so because of who I am, where I come from, how I look, or how I speak, and more so because he wants to distract from what I fight for. I fight for working people. I fight for the very people that have been priced out of this city. And I fight for the same people that he said he was fighting for. This is the same president who ran on a campaign of cheaper groceries. Who ran on a campaign about easing a suffocating cost of living crisis. Ultimately, it is easier for him to fan the flames of division than to acknowledge the ways in which he has betrayed those working-class Americans. Not just in this city, but across this country. And the ways in which he continues to betray them. We know that he would rather speak about me than speak about the legislation that he is shepherding through Washington, D.C. Legislation that will quite literally take healthcare away from Americans. Legislation that will steal food from the hungry. Legislation that looks to build upon one of the largest transfers of wealth we've seen in recent history in his first administration and do it once again for the very Americans who already have enough. We should be fighting for those that do not have what they need to live a dignified life. That is what I will do. And I am thankful to have the protection and to have the support of so many New Yorkers who have stood up and said how unacceptable this is. Including our governor and members of the labor movement. Ultimately, what I fear is that if this is what Donald Trump and his administration feel comfortable saying about the Democratic nominee for the mayor of New York City, imagine what they feel comfortable saying and doing about immigrants whose names they don't even know. Just yesterday, in a related development, President Trump's Homeland Security Advisory Council met. This is a group that includes such luminaries as Bo Dietl, the founder of Bikers for Trump, and Rudy Giuliani, who was, believe it or not, once the mayor of New York City himself. They quickly decided that the main thing the council needed to focus on was what to do about Zohran Memdani. Talking about how the Homeland Security Department has authorities that haven't been used in the past that maybe need to be looked into. So, before we delve into the actual threats against Memdani, Emily and I wanted to discuss his response. We both see this as an expression of a populist Democratic Party that could exist. But for the most part, currently does not. These are the green shoots of it popping up. If such a party did exist, it would represent a genuinely interesting development on the political scene, a party that working people might actually respect and vote for. This is particularly stunning because it's happening at a time when the Democratic Party standing with those very voters could not be lower. When we were in here yesterday, we saw a preview of Memdani's strategy in his initial statement after Trump's comments. And he immediately pivoted. We talked about how he pivoted to class-based arguments. He did the same thing right here. He pivoted not to what some would dismissively call class warfare, but to the core issue of affordability. This is what you do if you realize your average voter isn't Liz Cheney. This is how you run a campaign where you're going after Trump, but you're not fully taking his bait. I think it's a genuinely interesting development for Democrats, as they now have a textbook example of how to do this right. It's not backing down on the initial charge. And it's not apologizing for any of the culture war stuff Trump is throwing out there. It's pushing back on that, but then moving on and saying, the reason you're doing this is because you're a billionaire who doesn't care about people. And you just want to distract from the fact that you're stealing everyone's Medicaid and that you promised to make groceries cheaper but aren't doing it. It's really interesting because the 2017 version of the Democrats against Trump strategy would have just fully seized on the culture war aspect of it. They would have said, Donald Trump is a bigot. He's a xenophobe. We are a nation of immigrants. And to be clear, Mamdani doesn't back away from that rhetoric, believes all of those things, but that's not where he puts his energy. What you're saying about 2017 is so true and easily forgotten. I feel like that's what everyone would have done. The conventional wisdom would have been to maybe throw in a couple of lines about grocery prices and Medicaid. But to actually spend the bulk of the response talking about how he is going to be the first Muslim mayor of New York City and how that's what scares Donald Trump. He's scared of brown people. He's scared of change. I think that's totally true if we put Mamdani in a time machine back to 2017. Maybe he would have been smarter. But the Democratic strategists on the left would not have been. They would not have been. And I think it's tied up in the intrademocratic fight that happened back then. Bernie Sanders had just come off a very bitter primary, where a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters were still blaming him for Trump's victory. And anyone who said that Donald Trump supporters had, quote, economic anxiety, was accused of using that as code for the real reason they supported Trump, their racism, homophobia, and bigotry. Because of that, Democrats shied away from talking about economic anxiety, afraid they'd be accused of being racist themselves. Mamdani, instead, takes Trump at his word. If you notice in that clip, he says Trump ran on these things. The point he's making is that people voted for Trump because he promised to lower grocery prices and make their lives better. He's talking directly to Trump supporters and saying, he's not doing that. What is he doing? He's getting you all riled up about me, when all I'm trying to do is lower your grocery prices. I revisited this last week, when we talked to Zohran back in November or December. He mentioned he was following Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's lead in going out to the Bronx and Queens, interviewing people and pitching himself to Trump voters. He said the number one thing they were concerned about was the price of groceries. They feel like they have less in their bank accounts than they used to. Again, it's so obvious. But circa 2017, you just couldn't make that argument. It's weird because, of course, you could. But the structures of the Democratic Party at the time were just not allowing the party to respond in that way. They were also so thoroughly rewarded by the media for leaning into the culture war. And they were rewarded by a significant chunk of their voters. Now, inflation wasn't what it is today back in 2017. The economy stunk for other reasons, like stagnant wages, joblessness, and debt. The Democratic base would have been there for an economic message. But the party didn't need to go there. They could get donations, crowds, and fawning media coverage just for pointing out what a bigot Trump was. They didn't want to take seriously the idea that he actually ran on populist economic promises, because they thought the silver bullet was their own cultural war arguments. But that wasn't enough to persuade voters who have always baked into their calculation that most politicians are probably bad people. You're not going to convince a Trump supporter to abandon him by just saying he's a bad guy. They are making a calculated decision that he will disrupt the system. If you're not competing on that field, you're not competing at all. And I think the party's donors are ambivalent about any class-first messaging. They're probably thinking, can we do some of the other stuff? I remember when HuffPost put an asterisk after every mention of Trump that said something like, Donald Trump is a racist, xenophobic, homophobic bigot. While many people may believe that's true, it's not persuasive. It's a distraction. But I don't think that editor's note had any class messaging in it, because that would have felt too partisan. Pointing to universal American values, like equality and justice, feels less partisan than saying he's a billionaire who rips people off. That's an us against them framing. And it feels like you're taking a side in a fight. So the massive, unanswered question is whether Democrats can replicate this. Imagine if Democrats made affordability the thing that was associated with them. But they're already getting hammered. Republicans are running ads comparing random Democratic candidates to Mamdani. Glenn Youngkin said it about Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. It becomes suicidal for Democrats because the key is to define what Mamdani stands for to the national public before you get linked with him. If the public thinks, oh yeah, Mamdani, the guy who ran to make groceries cheaper in New York. Then when Republicans say Spanberger is just another Mamdani, voters might think, oh cool. So she's also going to make groceries cheaper in Virginia. But if Republicans are all saying he's a Sharia-lawing jihadist, and leading Democrats are also saying they have deep concerns about him, then you have a problem. Top Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, and Kirsten Gillibrand still haven't endorsed him. Tom Suozzi just wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about how bad he is. So if Republicans are saying he's a terrorist, and leading Democrats are saying, yeah, he's kind of bad, though Republicans are being bigoted about it, then the national voter is going to think, this guy seems pretty concerning. This is a tactic Republicans used effectively with Nancy Pelosi back in 2010. You can, in a red state, easily capitalize on a negative narrative about Mamdani. It doesn't mean he's a net drag on the party, but it will probably work for them in certain areas. If Democrats wanted to avoid this problem, they would simply say, of course I support Zohran Mamdani and his call to make groceries cheaper. You just say, I don't agree with him on everything, but I sure as hell agree with him on making groceries cheaper. It's such easy, free advice that we're always giving out. And yet, nobody takes it. In the end, the path Zohran Mamdani is charting illuminates a fundamental truth that has been lost in the noise of modern politics: real power lies not in stoking division, but in addressing the universal anxieties that bind us together. It's about the price of food, the security of a job, and the dream of a dignified life for our families. When a leader cuts through the manufactured outrage to speak to these core human needs, they build a coalition that is stronger than any political attack. This isn't just a clever campaign strategy. It's a profound reminder of what public service is meant to be: a fight not against each other, but for each other. This is the kind of in-depth analysis we are committed to bringing you every single day. If you value this perspective and want to support the future of independent media, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Click that button, turn on notifications, and join our community as we continue to break down the stories that truly matter. Thank you for watching.